It started with a text message at 2:47 a.m. Not unusual for her. She lived in a time zone of her own creation, where normal hours bent around her whims. "You still up?" 3 words that used to make my chest warm. That night, they just sat there on my screen, glowing in the dark like bait. I was up. I was always up when she decided she needed me. "Yeah," I typed back. The response came instantly, as if she'd been watching the typing indicator. "Can't sleep. Thinking about you." A heart emoji. Then another message. "JK LOL. Thinking about tacos actually. You're like 3rd on the list." I smiled at my phone. That was her humor. Sharp, self-aware, always dancing on the edge of something that could hurt if you thought about it too long. I'd learned not to think about it too long. She called it banter. I called it the price of admission to her world, and back then, I thought it was worth paying. The games had always been there, woven into the fabric of us, so gradually I didn't notice when playful became pointed. She'd cancel plans an hour before we were supposed to meet, then show up at my door 3 days later with coffee and that sideways grin, the one that made you forget you'd been angry. "You're so dramatic," she'd say, kissing my cheek. "It's cute." And I'd let it go because when she was present, fully present, it felt like standing in sunlight after weeks of rain. But that particular night marked something. We'd made plans. Real ones, the kind with reservations and a timeline. I'd even mentioned it to my friends, which I rarely did because I'd learned that her maybe meant maybe and her definitely meant maybe with better lighting. Still, she'd seemed certain. "Saturday. 7 p.m. Don't be late, or I'll start without you." She'd even sent a photo of her outfit, elegant and effortless in the way only she could manage. Saturday came. I showed up at 6:55 p.m., stood outside the restaurant checking my phone every 30 seconds. At 7:20, I texted. At 7:45, I called. At 8:10, I saw her Instagram story. A video of her and 3 friends at a completely different bar across town, laughing into the camera, her head thrown back in that performative joy she reserved for her audience. The caption read, "Spontaneous nights with my favorites, I wasn't in the frame. I wasn't even a footnote." The next morning, she called like nothing had happened. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry, something came up." Her voice had that practiced lightness, the tone you use when you're apologizing for forgetting to return a borrowed pen, not for leaving someone standing alone in public for 2 hours. "You're not actually mad, are you? You know how I am." I did know. That was the problem. "It's fine," I said, and the word tasted like metal in my mouth. "See? This is why you're my favorite. You just get it." She laughed, that crystalline sound that used to make me feel chosen. "Most guys would be, like, so butthurt. But you're different. You're secure." Secure. The word she used whenever I swallowed something that should have been unacceptable. I held the phone against my ear, and stared at my reflection in the darkened window of my apartment. My hand was trembling slightly around the coffee mug I'd been holding since dawn, the liquid inside long gone cold. "Yeah," I said quietly. "I get it." After we hung up, I sat there for a long time in the growing silence, that word echoing in my head. Secure. As if patience and understanding were the same as having no spine. As if kindness meant I'd never learned to recognize cruelty when it wore a smile. Something small and sharp had lodged itself in my chest during that phone call. I couldn't name it yet, but I could feel its edges every time I breathed. I stopped texting first. Not dramatically, not with some grand announcement, I just stopped reaching out. The silence felt strange at first, like holding my breath underwater, waiting to see how long I could last before my lungs forced me to surface. But days passed, and the urge to message her began to fade, replaced by something quieter and more unsettling: clarity. The coffee shop where we used to meet became a place I avoided. Not because it hurt to go there, but because I could finally see it for what it was, a stage she'd chosen for its lighting, its audience, the way she looked sitting by the window with afternoon sun turning her hair gold. I'd thought we were having moments. She'd been curating content. I started noticing things I'd trained myself to overlook. The way she'd lean away whenever I reached for her hand in public, subtle enough to seem accidental. How every story she told me had been edited for effect, the details shifting depending on who else was listening. The time she'd introduced me to her friends at a party with, "This is, wait, what are we even calling this?" and laughed while I stood there, wordless, as if my uncertainty was the punchline she'd been building toward all night. My friends noticed the change before she did. "You good?" Marcus asked one evening, setting down his beer with that careful concern people use when they're afraid of the answer. We were at his place, the TV playing something neither of us were watching. "You've been quiet." "I'm fine," I said. The lie came easily now. "Is it her?" He didn't need to say her name. Everyone knew who occupied that space in my life, the one marked complicated in air quotes. I stared at the condensation on my bottle, watching water droplets race each other down the glass. "I'm just taking a step back," I said finally. "Getting some perspective." Marcus nodded slowly. He'd met her once, briefly, and I'd watched his expression shift from charmed to cautious in the span of a single conversation. Afterward, he'd said nothing, but his silence had been loud enough. "Perspective's good," he said. "Sometimes you need distance to see what's actually in front of you." The truth was, I wasn't just stepping back. I was excavating. Every night, I'd lie awake replaying conversations, analyzing them like crime scenes, looking for the moment things had turned. But there was no single moment. It had always been this way. I'd just been too eager to believe in her edited version of us, the one where her teasing was affection and her absence made me special because she always came back. She noticed the silence around day 5. A text at 11 p.m. "Did I do something wrong?" followed immediately by another, "Or are you just being moody lol." That lol was armor. She put it at the end of sentences that might reveal too much, a tiny shield that let her retreat if I took it seriously. I stared at the message for a long time before typing back, "Just busy. Talk soon." "Busy?" she wrote back within seconds. "Since when are you busy?" "Since I stopped waiting for you to decide I was worth your time," I thought. But I didn't type it. Instead, I set the phone face down on my nightstand and listened to it buzz 3 more times before falling silent. The next morning, I woke up to a voice note. I almost didn't listen to it. Her voice came through breathless, performative in its casualness. "Hey, so I feel like you're being weird? And I don't really do well with weird energy, so if there's something you want to say, just say it. I thought we were, mature enough to communicate. Anyway, call me." Mature enough to communicate. I almost laughed. She'd built an entire relationship on ambiguity, on keeping me off balance, and now she wanted clarity because I'd stopped playing by her rules. I didn't call. Instead, I went for a walk. The city felt different in the late afternoon, softer somehow, less performed. I passed the restaurant where she'd stood me up, and for the first time, I didn't feel that sick twist in my stomach. I just felt tired. Tired of translating her mixed signals, of making excuses for behavior I'd never accept from anyone else, of treating breadcrumbs like they were banquets. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I didn't check it. I kept walking until I reached the park near my apartment, found a bench facing the water, and sat there as the sun dropped lower. Around me, life continued. Joggers, couples, a kid learning to ride a bike while his father jogged alongside, one hand hovering near the seat. Normal people doing normal things, none of them trapped in someone else's psychological game. When I finally checked my phone, I had 7 messages from her. They escalated predictably. Confusion, irritation, forced lightness, then finally something that almost looked like vulnerability. "I miss you," the last one read. "Can we please just talk?" I typed and deleted 3 different responses before settling on the simplest truth. "I need some space right now." Her reply came instantly. "Space? What does that even mean? You're being so dramatic." There it was again. Dramatic. Her favorite word for whenever I had feelings she didn't want to deal with. I watched the message sit there, waiting for me to defend myself, to apologize for needing something she didn't want to give. I locked my phone and put it away. The water in front of me caught the last of the daylight, turning briefly gold before fading to gray. Somewhere behind me, the kid on the bike was laughing, triumphant, his father cheering. I sat there until the cold seeped through my jacket, until the park began to empty, until the only sound was water lapping against the concrete barrier and my own steady breathing. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe all the way in. The space I'd asked for became a laboratory. Not for revenge, not yet, but for understanding. I started keeping a mental catalog of her patterns, the way a biologist might study a predator's hunting behavior. It wasn't obsession. It was pattern recognition, and the patterns were everywhere once I stopped pretending they didn't exist. She tested boundaries like someone probing a fence for weak points. Every few days, a message would arrive, each one calibrated differently. Sometimes playful. "Remember that stupid thing we saw? Just thought of you," sometimes wounded. "I don't understand why you're shutting me out." Sometimes aggressive. "You know, most people would actually communicate instead of playing these games." I responded minimally, politely, and only after deliberate delays. "Haha, yeah. I hear you. Not playing games, just busy." Each response said nothing while appearing to say something, a trick I'd learned from watching her rewrite reality for months. What surprised me was how much it bothered her. She'd built her power on being the one who withdrew, who kept people guessing, who decided when and how we connected. Now that I'd claimed that position, she didn't know what to do with her hands. The real shift came 2 weeks into my silence when I ran into her at Sarah's birthday party. I'd almost skipped it, knowing she'd be there, but something stopped me from hiding. Maybe it was Marcus's voice in my head. "Don't let her take up space in your life when she's not even there." She saw me the moment I walked in. I watched her face cycle through expressions, surprise, calculation, then that practiced smile she wore like a mask. She was talking to someone I didn't recognize, but her attention shifted entirely to me, the way a compass needle swings to magnetic north. I didn't approach her. Instead, I found Sarah, gave her a genuine hug and a gift I'd actually put thought into, then settled into a conversation with a couple of people from her work. Normal, easy conversation about nothing important. I laughed at someone's story about a disastrous client meeting. I refilled my drink. I existed in the room without performing existence. From my peripheral vision, I could see her watching, waiting for me to come to her, the way I always had. When I didn't, she excused herself from her conversation and made her way over, casual and deliberate, like she'd just noticed me. "Hey stranger," she said, touching my arm. The gesture was familiar, proprietary. "Didn't know you were coming." "Last-minute decision," I said, my voice pleasant and distant in the way you'd speak to an acquaintance you were polite to but didn't particularly know. Something flickered across her face. "Can we talk? Privately? I'm actually in the middle of..." I gestured vaguely at the group I'd been talking to. "It'll just take a second." Her smile was still there, but it had tightened at the corners. I looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. We stepped out onto Sarah's small balcony where the sounds of the party became muffled behind glass. She immediately moved closer, her body language shifting to something softer, more vulnerable. Another pattern. When control didn't work, she pivoted to fragility. "So you're really doing this?" she said. "The cold shoulder thing?" "I'm not doing anything," I said calmly. "I told you I needed space." "Space from what?" "From me." She laughed, but it came out wrong, too sharp. "I thought we were good. I thought we understood each other." "We do," I said. "That's the problem." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "What's that supposed to mean?" I could have explained. I could have listed every incident, every small cruelty dressed as humor, every time she'd made me feel like I was asking for too much by asking for basic respect. But I'd learned something important during my retreat. Explaining yourself to someone who's pretending not to understand is just another form of the game. It means I'm good, I said. Really? I hope you are too. You're being so weird right now. She crossed her arms, and I recognized the defensive posture, the one that preceded her turning me into the villain of a story she'd tell her friends. I literally don't know what I did. Nothing, I said, and I meant it. She'd done nothing outside the boundaries of what I'd allowed. That was on me. I'm just focusing on other things right now. Other things. She repeated it like it was a foreign phrase. Like what? Myself, I said simply. The word hung there between us. I watched her process it, watched her try to find the angle, the leverage point where she could regain footing. But there wasn't one. I'd given her nothing to push against, no anger to deflect, no accusations to deny. Just a wall made of calm disinterest. Fine, she said finally, her voice tight. If you want to be like this, fine. I thought you were different, but I guess I was wrong. There it was. The closing move, the implication that I'd failed some test, that walking away made me just like everyone else. It would have worked a month ago. A month ago, I would have scrambled to prove I was different, to win back her approval. Maybe you were, I said. Have a good night. I went back inside before she could respond. My hands were steady as I grabbed another drink. Sarah caught my eye from across the room and gave me a subtle thumbs up. She'd been watching, I realized. She'd probably always been watching, waiting to see if I'd figure it out. The rest of the party, I felt her awareness of me like static electricity. She laughed louder, moved through the room with exaggerated ease, took photos with friends and posted them immediately. Performance art, all of it, and I was supposed to be in the audience feeling excluded, jealous, diminished. Instead, I left early, said my goodbyes, and walked home through streets that felt wider somehow, less claustrophobic. My phone buzzed once around midnight, her name on the screen. I read the preview. You know what? You're actually kind of. I didn't open it. I didn't need to see the rest. Whatever she'd called me, whatever narrative she was building, it didn't matter. She could rewrite history any way she wanted in that group chat with her friends, could paint me as the villain or the victim or whatever role served her story best. I was done auditioning. The next morning, I woke up without the weight of her expectations pressing down on my chest. I made coffee, opened my laptop, and started working on projects I'd been neglecting. Not to prove anything, not to show her what she was missing, but because I finally had the mental space to focus on things that actually mattered to me. When my phone buzzed with another message from her, I glanced at it, registered it as white noise, and went back to what I was doing. The message could wait. She could wait. For the first time in our entire complicated history, my attention wasn't something she could summon at will. That's when I understood. I hadn't just retreated. I'd reclaimed something she'd been borrowing without permission for months. You taught me the script, I thought, setting my phone face down on the desk. I'm just performing it better. The difference was, I wasn't performing for an audience. I was just living my life, and she was no longer at the center of it. That, I was beginning to realize, would bother her more than anything I could have said. The unraveling happened faster than I expected. I heard about it in pieces, fragments that reached me through mutual friends who didn't quite know how to bring it up. Sarah mentioned it first, careful and casual over coffee 3 weeks after her party. So, I don't know if you've noticed, but she's been different lately, Sarah said, stirring her latte with more focus than necessary. Kind of all over the place. I hadn't noticed because I'd stopped looking. My social media had been pruned. Not blocked, nothing dramatic, just muted. Her updates no longer appeared in my feed, which meant her world continued without my observation. Apparently, that world was fracturing. The thing is, Sarah continued, and I could see her weighing how much to tell me, she's been reaching out to people. A lot. Like, showing up places she never used to go, tagging along to things she'd normally bail on. She paused. She asked about you. Multiple times. What did you tell her? That you seemed good. Which you do. Sarah studied my face. She didn't like that answer. I learned more over the following days, not because I asked but because the story started leaking through the crack. Marcus mentioned seeing her at a bar we used to go to, alone, scrolling through her phone with the kind of intensity that made people give her space. She looked up every time the door opened, he said. Like she was waiting for someone. The guy she'd been seeing casually, the one she'd posted photos with during my retreat, all intimate angles and deliberate composition, had apparently ended things. I heard it from Jake, who'd heard it from someone else, the way information travels through social circles like ripples on water. Something about mixed signals, Jake said. He got tired of the games. I felt nothing hearing this. No satisfaction, no vindication. Just a distant recognition of pattern repetition. Her Instagram stories became more frequent, more desperate in their casual presentation. Photos of empty wine glasses with captions about self-care nights. Vague posts about knowing your worth and cutting off fake people. The performance had shifted from confidence to wounded pride, and her audience, that carefully curated collection of admirers, was starting to thin. People talk. Not loudly, not cruelly, but in the quiet way people reassess someone when the glamour fades. I heard snippets in conversations I wasn't meant to hear, observations from people who'd been charmed by her once and were now comparing note. She's kind of exhausting, isn't she? I invited her last week, and she canceled 30 minutes before. Third time this month. Did you see that post? The passive-aggressive one? Wonder who that was about. The social ecosystem she'd thrived in was responding to her the way she'd always responded to others, with polite distance, with suddenly full schedules, with the kind of soft exclusion that doesn't announce itself but accumulates over time. I ran into her again, this time not by choice. The grocery store near my apartment, a Wednesday evening, both of us in the produce section reaching for the same bundle of basil. Our hands nearly touched. "Hi," she said, and her voice was different. Smaller. The performance had been stripped away, or maybe she was just too tired to maintain it. "Hey," I replied, stepping back to give her space. She took the basil but didn't move away. "How have you been?" "Good." "You?" "Fine." "Yeah." "Fine." She said it 3 times, like she was trying to convince herself. Her eyes had shadows under them that makeup couldn't quite hide. "I've been meaning to reach out, actually. I feel like we left things weird." "Did we?" I kept my tone neutral, not cold but not warm either. Switzerland in human form. "Come on," she said, and there was an edge of her old self in it, that challenging tone she used to deploy so effectively. "You know we did. You just disappeared. I told you I needed space." 4 weeks. You needed space for weeks. Her voice rose slightly, then fell as she caught herself. People were shopping around us, studiously ignoring our conversation. That's not space. That's just gone. I looked at her. Really looked at her, and saw something I'd never seen before. Fear. Not of me, but of what my absence represented. She'd built her identity on being wanted, on being chased, on having the power to grant or withhold attention. I'd stopped wanting the things she was offering, and it had created a void she didn't know how to fill. "I'm sorry you feel that way," I said, and meant it. Not sorry for leaving, but sorry that she'd structured her entire sense of self around a game that required other people to keep playing. "That's it." Her hand tightened around the basil. "That's all you have to say? What do you want me to say?" "I want," she started, then stopped. Her eyes were bright now, glassy. "I don't know. Something. Anything. I keep replaying everything and I can't figure out what I did that was so terrible that you just cut me out like I never mattered." There it was. The question that had probably been keeping her up at night, the one she'd been building toward through all those messages and posts and carefully constructed encounters. And the truth was complicated. She'd done everything and nothing. 1,000 small cuts that didn't seem like cuts when you were grateful for the attention between them. "You didn't do anything terrible," I said quietly. We just wanted different things. That's all. What did you want? The question came out almost as a whisper. Something real, I said. She flinched like I'd slapped her. I watched her face cycle through reactions, denial, anger, hurt, before settling into something that looked like resignation. She nodded slowly, not quite meeting my eyes anymore. Right, she said. Well, I guess I'll see you around. Take care of yourself, I said, and I meant that too. I watched her walk away, her cart slightly crooked, her shoulders curved inward in a way I'd never seen before. She looked smaller somehow, diminished not by cruelty but by the simple act of someone stopping to feed her the attention she required to feel substantial. My phone buzzed later that night. A long message, paragraphs of it, her thoughts spilling out in real time. Apologies and justifications and questions all tangled together. I read it once, slowly, and then set my phone down. I didn't respond. Not because I wanted to hurt her, but because there was nothing left to say that wouldn't just restart a cycle we'd both be better off leaving broken. She showed up at my apartment on a Thursday evening. No warning, no text asking if I was home. Just 3 deliberate knocks on my door at 8:47 p.m., when she knew I'd be winding down for the night. I looked through the peephole and saw her standing there, arms crossed against the October cold, her breath visible in the hallway light. For a moment I considered not answering. But that felt too much like hiding, and I'd spent enough time in retreat. I opened the door. "We need to talk," she said. Not a question, not a request. A statement delivered with the kind of fragile authority people use when they're trying to reassemble control from broken pieces. "It's late," I said. "I know what time it is." Her voice had an edge to it, sharp and unsteady. "Are you going to let me in, or are we doing this in the hallway?" I stepped aside. She walked past me into the living room, and I noticed the small details. Her jacket buttoned wrong, her hair pulled back hastily, the way her eyes were slightly red like she'd been crying or trying not to. She looked around the apartment as if searching for evidence of something, though I couldn't imagine what. "Can I get you anything?" I asked, closing the door. "Water? Tea?" "I don't want tea." She turned to face me, and her expression was a complicated mixture of anger and something that looked almost like pleading. "I want you to tell me what the fuck is going on." I'd never heard her curse like that, direct and raw, without the performative edge she usually added to make everything seem playful. It was the first genuinely unfiltered thing I'd heard from her in months. "I don't know what you mean," I said calmly. "Yes, you do." She took a step closer. "You've completely shut me out. You won't talk to me, you barely respond to messages, and when I do see you, you act like I'm some stranger you're being polite to. After everything," her voice cracked slightly, "after everything we had, you just, what? Decided I wasn't worth your time anymore. Is that what you think happened?" "I don't know what happened." The words came out louder than she intended. She caught herself, lowered her voice. "That's why I'm here. Because I keep trying to understand what I did that was so unforgivable that you'd just erase me from your life." I moved to the window, looked out at the street below where a couple was walking a dog, their laughter rising faintly through the glass. Normal people having a normal evening. When I spoke, my voice was quiet but clear. "Do you remember the night you stood me up at Marcello's?" She blinked, thrown by the specificity. I apologized for that. Something came up. You were at a bar across town with your friends. You posted about it on Instagram while I was standing outside the restaurant. She started then stopped. "Okay, yes, but I didn't mean to." "Do you remember when you introduced me at Julie's party?" I continued, still not looking at her. "You said, 'What are we even calling this?' and laughed. Everyone laughed. I stood there and laughed too, because that's what you do when someone makes you the punchline." "That was a joke," she said, but her voice had gone uncertain. "It was. You're very funny." I turned to face her now. "Do you remember the night I told you about my father being sick, and you changed the subject after 30 seconds to tell me about a guy who'd been flirting with you at work?" Her mouth opened, closed. She looked like I'd struck her. "I remember all of it," I said. "Every cancellation, every time you made me wait while you decided if I was worth your attention that day, every joke at my expense, every moment you treated my feelings like they were an inconvenience to your good time." My voice hadn't risen. I wasn't angry. I was just stating facts. "You asked what you did that was unforgivable." Nothing. None of it was unforgivable. It was just cumulative. "That's not fair," she said, and now there were tears in her eyes. "You never said anything. You never told me I was hurting you. How was I supposed to know?" "You weren't supposed to know," I said quietly. "You were supposed to care enough to notice." The words hung in the air between us. She looked at me like I'd become someone she didn't recognize, which I suppose was true. The person who would have accepted crumbs and called them a feast was gone. He'd left the night she'd casually dismissed him for the 1,000th time, and what remained was just someone who'd learned to value himself enough to stop accepting less. "I did care," she said, her voice breaking. "I do care. I know I'm not perfect, I know I can be selfish sometimes, but I thought," she wiped at her eyes. "I thought what we had meant something to you." "It did," I said. "That's why I had to leave." She stared at me, and I watched understanding slowly dawn across her face. Not understanding of what she'd done. That would take time, if it came at all, but understanding that this wasn't a negotiation. There was no combination of words she could say, no promise she could make, no version of vulnerable she could perform that would undo the simple fact that I was done. "So that's it?" she asked finally. "You've just decided?" "I decided weeks ago," I said. "I'm just finally comfortable with it." She nodded slowly, mechanically, like someone processing information they didn't want to accept. She moved toward the door, then stopped with her hand on the handle. "You know what hurts the most?" she said without turning around. "It's not that you're leaving. It's that you seem so okay with it. Like I was just easy to get over." "You weren't," I said honestly. "But staying was harder." She left without another word. I heard her footsteps fade down the hallway, heard the distant ding of the elevator. I stood in the center of my living room, listening to the silence she'd left behind, and felt something release in my chest. Something I'd been holding so tightly for so long I'd forgotten it was there. The apartment felt larger somehow. Quieter. Mine. The messages started 3 days later. Not the angry, defensive ones I might have expected, but something worse. Desperate attempts at reconciliation wrapped in self-awareness she'd never shown before. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said," the first one read. "You were right. About all of it. I'm sorry." Then, an hour later, "I know sorry isn't enough, but I want you to know I hear you. I really do. By evening, can we please just talk? I miss you. I miss us." I read them all. Didn't respond to any of them. Not out of cruelty, but because I'd learned that engaging would only restart the cycle with a slightly different script. She was offering me the role of teacher now, the one who could guide her toward being better. It was appealing in its way. The fantasy that my pain had meant something had changed her. But I'd played enough roles in her theater. The shift became visible in the spaces we used to share. Sarah told me she'd started showing up to group events she'd previously considered beneath her. Game nights, casual dinners, the kind of low-key gatherings she used to skip for something more photogenic. She was trying, Sarah said, trying to be present, trying to prove something to an audience that had mostly stopped watching. "She asked about you again," Sarah mentioned over lunch. "I told her you were doing well. She got this look on her face like..." Sarah paused, searching for the word. "Like she was waiting for me to say you were falling apart." When I didn't, she just nodded and changed the subject. Marcus reported similar encounters. Ran into her at the coffee shop. She was alone, reading. Actually reading, not just on her phone. He raised an eyebrow. She tried to start a conversation. Asked how you were. When I kept it vague, she looked like she wanted to ask more but didn't. It was weird, man. She seemed small. I felt no triumph hearing this, just a distant sadness for someone who'd built her entire identity on being desired and was now discovering how hollow that foundation had been. She was seeking what I'd already stopped offering: validation, attention, confirmation that she mattered in my life. The calls came next, late at night, always after 11 p.m., when loneliness and wine combined to dissolve whatever pride she had left. I never answered, but I listened to the voicemails the next morning. Her voice in these messages was unguarded, raw in ways she'd never allowed herself to be when we were together. "I know you're probably asleep," one began. "Or ignoring me. Both are valid." A long pause, the sound of her breathing. "I just wanted to say, I get it now. What you meant about wanting something real. I was so busy performing that I forgot to actually feel anything. And now you're gone and I feel everything and I hate it. I hate that it took losing you to figure out how to be honest." Another night. "Remember when you said I should have cared enough to notice? I notice everything now. How quiet my phone is. How people look at me like they're waiting for me to disappoint them. How I don't even know who I am when no one's watching." Her voice cracked. "Maybe that's what I deserve. Maybe that's just karma. I deleted them after listening once. Not because they didn't affect me, they did, in a complicated way, but because I understood what they really were." She wasn't seeking forgiveness, she was seeking absolution. She wanted me to tell her she wasn't as bad as she felt, to soften the edges of her self-confrontation. But that wasn't my job anymore. 2 weeks after the confrontation at my apartment, I saw her at a coffee shop I'd started frequenting. She was sitting alone by the window, my old spot, I realized, staring at her phone with an expression that suggested she was looking at it without really seeing it. She hadn't noticed me come in. I could have left, could have slipped back out the door and found coffee elsewhere. Instead, I ordered my usual and found a table across the room. When she finally looked up, our eyes met. I saw the shock, then the hope, then the quick calculation of whether to approach. She stood, hesitated, then walked over. "Hi," she said. "Hi. Can I?" She gestured at the empty chair across from me. I considered saying no. It would have been justified, even kind in its way, a clean boundary that let both of us move on. But something in her posture stopped me. She wasn't performing anymore. The mask had cracked so thoroughly she'd stopped trying to hold the pieces together. "Sure," I said. She sat carefully, like someone learning how to take up space without demanding it. We were quiet for a moment, the coffee shop sounds filling the silence between us. The hiss of steam, distant conversations, someone's laptop keys clicking. "I'm not going to ask you to take me back," she said finally. "I know that's not. I know. Okay. I just wanted to say that you were right. About everything. And I'm sorry it took me so long to understand what you were trying to tell me." She wrapped her hands around her cup, not drinking from it. "I've been going to therapy. Actually going, not just saying I should go. It's been hard. Seeing yourself clearly is really hard." "It is," I agreed. She asked me, my therapist, what I was getting out of the games. Like, what need they were filling. She laughed softly, bitterly. I couldn't answer her. Because the truth is, I don't think I was getting anything except proof that people would put up with it. And I mistook that for being wanted. I watched her speak, watched her struggle with honesty like someone learning a foreign language. Part of me wanted to comfort her, to ease the obvious pain of her self-discovery. But that impulse came from old programming, the belief that her discomfort was mine to fix. "I hope therapy helps," I said. And I meant it. She looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw her recognize something. That I cared about her well-being but not about being part of her life. That I wished her the best but from a distance. That my kindness was no longer an invitation. "You're really done, aren't you?" she asked quietly. "Yeah," I said. "I am." She nodded slowly, accepting what she'd probably known since that night in my apartment. Can I ask you something? Sure. Are you happier now? Without me? It was a loaded question, one designed to hurt herself regardless of my answer. But she'd asked honestly, so I answered honestly. I'm more myself now, I said. That feels better than happy. She absorbed this, and something shifted in her expression, not anger, not resentment, but resignation. She stood, leaving her coffee barely touched. Thank you, she said, for being honest, even when I didn't deserve it. Take care of yourself, I said. She left, and I watched her walk past the window, her shoulders straight but her pace uncertain. She looked like someone who'd finally understood the cost of her choices and was beginning the long work of living with them. I finished my coffee slowly. My phone was quiet. The afternoon light shifted through the windows, marking time without urgency. Outside, people moved through their lives, purposeful, aimless, joyful, struggling, and I was just one of them now. Not part of anyone else's story. Just living my own.